A dusty black man is mocked and banished from a Michelin-star restaurant, only to reveal he's the legendary chef behind its iconic dish, turning the tables in a fiery showdown. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell to catch our latest videos. Don't miss this epic drama. Join us for more stories that'll keep you glued. The doors of Étoile swung open, and Samuel Carter stepped into the Michelin-starred restaurant, his work boots leaving faint traces of dust on the polished oak floor. The air was thick with the scent of truffle and ambition, a place where the city's elite dined on plates that cost more than most people's weekly wages. Samuel, mid-50s, his denim jacket stained with the grit of a construction site, stood out like a shadow in a sea of silken suits. His eyes, sharp and weathered, scanned the room. Dark wood tables, gold-trimmed chandeliers, waiters gliding like ghosts with trays of glistening dishes. He wasn't here to gawk or beg for a seat. He was here for a purpose, one that no one in this glittering dining room could have guessed. The hostess, a young woman with sleek blonde hair and a smile as cold as the champagne on the tables, stood behind a marble counter, her fingers tapping a tablet. Samuel approached, his voice low but steady. "Table for one, please," he said. The hostess didn't look up, her eyes fixed on the screen as if his words were smoke dissipating in the air. Samuel waited, his calloused hands resting on the counter, the silence stretching just long enough to feel intentional. "Excuse me," he said louder now. The hostess raised her head, her gaze sweeping over him, his boots, his jacket, his skin, and her lips tightened, a subtle judgment that Samuel had seen too many times. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed politeness. "We're fully booked tonight." Samuel's jaw clenched, but he kept his tone even. "That's odd because I made a reservation," he said, "under Samuel Carter." The hostess's fingers danced lazily across the tablet, her eyes barely scanning before she shook her head. "Nothing here," she said, her smile now a smirk. "Must be a mistake. Maybe you meant another place." Samuel's eyes narrowed, his pulse quickening, not with doubt but with recognition. He knew this game had felt its sting in countless places where his skin marked him as less than check. "Again," he said, his voice firm, unyielding. The hostess sighed a dramatic huff that seemed to say, "This guy's wasting my time," and tapped the screen with exaggerated slowness. "Still nothing," she said, her smirk widening. "Sorry, sir, but you'll need to leave. We have actual guests to serve." The word actual hit like a chain, and the dining room's hum faltered. Heads turning, eyes locking onto Samuel. A man in a tailored suit at a nearby table leaned toward his companion, his voice carrying. "Probably can't even read the menu," he said, chuckling. Samuel's fingers curled into fists, but he kept his face neutral, his breathing steady. He'd been underestimated before, had carried the weight of those assumptions his whole life. But tonight was different. Tonight he wasn't just any man, he was Samuel Carter, and he had a job to do. The restaurant buzzed around him, waiters weaving between tables, the clink of silverware punctuating the low murmur of wealth. Samuel stood his ground, his voice cutting through the noise. "I'd like to speak to the manager," he said. The hostess's smirk faltered just for a moment before she recovered, picking up a phone and muttering into it, her eyes never leaving. Samuel's daring him to push further. The diners watched, their glances sharp and curious, some whispering behind their menus. A woman in a sequined dress murmured, "He's making a scene," her tone thick with disdain. Samuel's nails dug into his palms, but he kept his composure, his mind flashing to the reason he was here. Étoile wasn't just a restaurant, it was his creation, or at least its heart was born from a recipe he'd crafted decades ago. A dish that had put this place on the map. He'd retired quietly, but recent complaints. Guests turned away, staff of arrogance. Whispers of discrimination had brought him back, unannounced, to see the truth for himself. The manager appeared, a wiry man with slicked back hair and a suit that screamed self-importance. His eyes sweeping over Samuel with the same dismissive glance as the hostess. "What's the problem here?" he said, his voice clipped. The hostess jumped in before Samuel could speak. "He claims he has a reservation, but there's nothing in the system," she said, her tone smug. "Causing trouble, sir." Samuel's lips parted, disbelief flickering across his face. "Trouble," he said, his voice rising just enough to draw more eyes. "I asked for my table and you refused to check properly." The manager held up a hand, silencing him. "Sir, if you don't have a reservation, you're trespassing," he said. "Leave now or I'll have you removed." The word trespassing landed like a slap, and for a moment the dining room seemed to hold its breath. Samuel reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing his phone, and for a split second he considered making the call that would end this charade, but not yet. He wanted them to dig deeper to bury themselves before he pulled the curtain back. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low, heavy with promise. The manager scoffed, waving him off. "The only mistake is you thinking you belong here," he said. "Get out." The hostess smirked, triumphant, and a waiter nearby nodded as if the matter were settled. Samuel turned his boots silent now, against the oak, and walked toward the door, the weight of every stare following him. But as he reached the exit, his hand on the handle, he paused, his lips curving into a small, dangerous smile. They thought they'd won. They thought he was nobody. They had no idea who they'd just crossed. Samuel Carter's hand lingered on the door handle of Étoile, the cold brass, a stark contrast to the heat of humiliation burning in his chest, the laughter from the dining room slicing through the air like shards of glass. He could walk out, let the hostess's smug smirk and the manager's dismissive wave be the end of it. Let the diner's sneers fade into the night, but every muscle in his body refused to budge. This wasn't just about him. This was about the legacy he'd poured his soul into the dish that had made Étoile a Michelin-star, the promise that no one would ever be turned away from its tables. He was Samuel Carter, the chef who'd created the restaurant's heart, and he was here for a reason. His mind flashed back to a week ago to the quiet of his old friend's office, the current head chef who'd called him with a heavy voice. "Sam, something's wrong at Étoile," he'd said. "Guests are complaining, people being ignored, turned away, treated like they don't belong. I need you to see it for yourself. No fanfare, just you." Samuel had agreed, his heart sinking at the thought of his creation rotting from within. And now, standing in the doorway of his own restaurant, he felt the weight of that mission pressing against his ribs. He turned his boots, pivoting on the oak floor, and the dining room's chatter faltered, eyes snapping to him once more, too. The hostess, still behind her marble counter, froze her tablet, forgotten her smirk, replaced by a flicker of unease as Samuel strode back toward her. Each step deliberate, his denim jacket swaying like a flag of defiance. The air crackled with tension, the diner's whispers growing louder, their stares heavier, but Samuel's gaze was locked on the hostess, who shifted uncomfortably, her confidence wavering. "I'm not leaving," he said, his voice low but steady, cutting through the murmurs like a knife. "I have a reservation and you're going to find it." The hostess's eyes widened, but she recovered her lips, curling into a sneer. "I already told you there is nothing here," she said, her voice loud enough to carry across the room. "You're wasting our time, sir." Samuel's pulse quickened, not from doubt but from the audacity of the lie. He knew his reservation was in the system. He'd made it himself a simple test to see if the complaints were true, but something in the hostess's tone, in the way her eyes flicked to a waiter for backup, told him this wasn't an error. This was intentional. A waiter, young and wiry, with a forced smile, stepped forward, his tray balanced precariously. "Sir, you heard her," he said. "No reservation, no table. Why don't you just go?" The word "go" landed like a punch, and the dining room erupted into a low hum of agreement, diners nodding as if Samuel's presence were a stain on their evening. A woman in a sequined dress at a nearby table leaned back, her voice dripping with condescension. "Some people think they can just walk into a place like this," she said, loud enough for all to hear. Her companion, a man in a velvet blazer, laughed, his eyes raking over Samuel's dusty jacket. "Probably can't even afford the water here," he said. The laughter spread, a chorus of entitlement that made Samuel's skin burn, but he kept his face a mask of calm, his fists clenched at his sides. He'd faced this before, the assumptions, the sneers, but never in a place that carried his own legacy, his own sweat and genius. The hostess, emboldened by the crowd, leaned forward, her voice now openly mocking. "Let's be real, sir," she said. "This is Étoile. You think you can just stroll in, looking like that? Maybe try the diner down the street." The words were a blade, and the dining room's laughter was the twist. Each chuckle digging deeper, Samuel's heart pounded, his anger rising like a tide, but he forced it down his mind, racing back to the guest complaints his friend had shared. Letters about rudeness, about certain customers being dismissed, about staff who acted like gatekeepers of privilege. "It's not just bad service," Sam, his friend, had said, his voice heavy. "It's a betrayal of what you built." Samuel had promised to find the truth, and now, standing in the eye of this storm, he saw it clear as day. This wasn't about a busy night or a glitch. This was about him, his skin, His clothes, his presence, and the unspoken rules that said he didn't belong. The manager reappeared, his slicked back hair gleaming under the chandelier light, his face red with irritation. "I thought I told you to leave." He snapped, his voice booming across the dining room. "You're disrupting our guests." Samuel's eyes locked onto his, unflinching. "I'm a guest," he said, his voice low but fierce, "and you're refusing to serve me." The manager scoffed, waving a hand as if swatting a fly. "You're no guest," he said. "You're a problem. Get out before I call security." The threat hung in the air, and for a moment the dining room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Samuel to crumble. The hostess smirked again, her confidence restored, and the waiter crossed his arms, his eyes daring him to argue. The diners leaned forward, their faces a mix of amusement and disdain, as if Samuel were a spectacle for their entertainment. But Samuel felt something else, a fire deep and unyielding that refused to let him back down. His mind flashed to the dish that had made Étoile famous, the braised short rib with truffle glaze, a recipe he'd perfected in a tiny apartment kitchen decades ago, a dish that had drawn crowds and critics that had built this very restaurant. He'd come here to see if that legacy still held, and now he knew it didn't. The manager's voice rose sharp and commanding. "Enough of this," he said. "You're not welcome here, security." He snapped his fingers, and a burly man in a black uniform appeared at the edge of the dining room, his hand already on his radio. The hostess clapped her hands delighted, and the diners murmured their approval, some pulling out their phones to record the drama. Samuel stood his ground, his heart racing, his mind replaying his friend's words. "See what's really happening, Sam." He looked at the manager, at the hostess, at the waiter, at the diners with their sneers and their cameras, and made a decision. He wasn't leaving? Not yet. He took a step forward, his boots thumping against the oak, and the security guard hesitated, caught off guard by his defiance. The manager's face twisted with rage. "What are you waiting for?" he shouted. "Get him out!" But Samuel's eyes were blazing now, his voice rising clear and unshaken. "You think you can just push me out?" he said. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The dining room fell silent, the laughter dying, the phones lowering as every eye locked onto him, sensing something was about to shift. The hostess's smirk faded, the waiter's arms dropped, and the manager's mouth opened, but no words came. Samuel's lips curved into a small, dangerous smile. They thought they had him. They thought they'd won. They were so wrong. The dining room of Étoile was a crucible of tension. Every whisper, every stare, crackling with the weight of a reckoning yet to come. As Samuel Carter stood defiant, his work boots rooted to the oak floor, his small, dangerous smile, a silent vow that this wasn't over. The security guard loomed at the edge of the room, his hand still on his radio, his eyes darting between Samuel and the manager, whose face was now flushed with a fury that fed off the diner's approval. The hostess, her smirk faltering, gripped her marble counter like a lifeline, while the waiter, his tray long abandoned, shifted nervously, his earlier bravado crumbling. The diners, their phones raised, recorded every second, their laughter replaced by a hungry silence, waiting for Samuel to break under the pressure. But Samuel's eyes burned with a fire that refused to dim, his voice still echoing. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." A challenge that hung in the air like a storm cloud. The manager, his slicked back hair gleaming under the chandelier light, snapped his fingers again, his voice booming through the restaurant. "I said, get him out," he shouted, the words ricocheting off the gold-trimmed walls. The security guard took a step forward, but Samuel didn't flinch, his voice rising clear and unshaken. "You think you can just throw me out like I'm trash," he said, each word a spark in the tinderbox of the dining room. The manager laughed, a harsh grating sound that made the diners murmur their agreement. "Trash," he said. "That's exactly what you are in here, a nobody making a scene. You don't belong in Étoile, and you never will." The words hit like a lash, and for a moment Samuel felt the sting, not of doubt, but of betrayal. This was the restaurant he'd built, or at least its soul born from his braised short rib. With truffle glaze, a dish that had drawn critics and crowds that had made Étoile a Michelin-star. And yet here he was, its creator, branded an outsider in his own legacy. The hostess chimed in, her voice sharp with mockery. "Just go, sir," she said. "You're embarrassing yourself." The diners erupted into laughter louder, now a chorus of entitlement that made Samuel's blood boil. He could feel the anger surging hot and fierce, but he forced it down, his mind flashing back to the complaints his friend, The head chef had shared stories of guests ignored, dismissed, turned away for no reason but their appearance or skin. It's a betrayal, His friend had said, his eyes heavy with shame. Your dish is still on the menu, but your spirit's gone. Samuel had promised to uncover the truth, and now standing in the heart of Étoile, he saw it clear as day. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice, a deliberate act of exclusion, and it was happening to him. He took a step forward, his boots thumping defiantly against the oak, and the security guard hesitated, his hand dropping from his radio. I'm not leaving. Samuel said, his voice steady but laced with steel. I have a reservation and I have every right to be here. The manager's face twisted, his patience snapping like a brittle twig. Right, he spat. You have no rights here. You're a drifter who wandered into the wrong place, and now you're ruining our night. Security now, the guard moved closer, his bulk casting a shadow over Samuel, but he held his ground, his eyes locked on the manager's. You're wrong, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that made the room pause. I belong here more than you ever will. The diners gasped, some laughing, others whispering, their phones still rolling, capturing every word. The hostess clapped her hands, delighted, her voice sing-song. Oh, this is too good, she said. You really think you're somebody, don't you? The waiter, emboldened, stepped forward, his voice sharp. Just stop, he said. You're only making it worse. Leave before you get hurt. The threat hung heavy, and for a split second, Samuel's resolve wavered, the weight of the room's hostility pressing against his chest. He was one man alone, surrounded by people who saw him as less than nothing, and the security guard was now just a few feet away, his hand inching toward his arm. But then he remembered the kitchen where he'd created his masterpiece, the long nights perfecting every note of flavor, the pride in his friend's voice when he'd said, Sam, you made it, Étoile. He straightened his shoulders, squaring his eyes blazing with defiance. You want to know why I'm here, he said, his voice rising, filling the room. I'm here because this place is supposed to mean something. Excellence, hospitality, respect. But you're all failing it. You're failing. He stopped himself, biting back the truth, not ready to reveal his identity yet. The manager's eyes narrowed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Failing, he said. The only one failing here is you, thinking you can lecture us. You're done. Get him out. The security guard reached for Samuel's arm, but he stepped back, his voice sharp. Don't touch me, he said. His words so fierce the guard froze his hand, hovering in midair. The diners were silent now, their phones still raised, but their laughter gone, replaced by a tense curiosity. The hostess, sensing the shift, tried to regain control, her voice shrill. What are you waiting for? She shouted. He's nobody. Throw him out. But Samuel's eyes were locked on the manager, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He could end this now, could pull out his phone and call his friend, let the truth thunder through this room and bring these people to their knees, but he didn't. He wanted them to keep going, to pile on their insults, to dig their graves so deep they'd never climb out. You're making a mistake, he said again, his voice quiet but heavy with warning. The manager laughed, waving him on. The only mistake was letting you through the door, he said. You're not welcome here, and you never will be. The words were a blade, and the diner's murmurs of agreement were the twist, each one cutting deeper. Samuel's fingers brushed his phone in his pocket, his thumb hovering over the call button, but he held back his lips, curving into that small, dangerous smile. They thought they were in control. They thought they could break him. They had no idea how wrong they were. The security guard took another step, his voice gruff. Let's go, man, he said. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. But Samuel didn't move, his eyes still on the manager, his smile growing. Harder, he said. You haven't seen hard yet. The dining room held its breath. The tension so thick, it was almost tangible, as every eye waited for what came next. They thought this was the end. They thought they'd won. They were about to learn how much they'd underestimated him. The dining room of Étoile was a pressure cooker. Every glance, every held breath charged with the weight of an imminent upheaval as Samuel Carter stood unyielding, his work boots planted on the oak floor. His small, dangerous smile, a silent promise of reckoning. The security guard's hand hovered inches from his arm, his gruff command. Let's go, man. Still lingering, but Samuel's eyes were locked on the manager, whose flushed face glistened with sweat, his authority unraveling with every second Samuel refused to break. The hostess, her hands trembling on her marble counter, tried to mask her unease with a faltering smirk, while the waiter, his tray forgotten, backed away, his confidence shattered. The diners, their phones raised, recorded the standoff. their earlier sneers replaced by a tense electric silence. Sensing the ground was about to shift, Samuel's fingers closed around his phone in his pocket, his thumb brushing the call button, and this time he didn't hesitate. He was done with their games, done letting them heap insults, done waiting for them to bury themselves deeper. He pulled out the phone, his movements slow and deliberate, and the manager's eyes narrowed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What calling for help, boss?" he said, his laugh harsh and mocking. "Go ahead, call whoever you want. It won't get you a table." The hostess chimed in, her voice shrill with false bravado. "Yeah, call your buddy from the construction site," she said. "This isn't a bar. You're out of your league." The diner snickered, some leaning forward, their phones zooming in, eager to capture Samuel's defeat. But Samuel's smile only grew, his eyes blazing with a fire that made the security guard pause, his hand dropping to his side. He tapped the screen, pressed the phone to his ear, and spoke, his voice low but clear. Each word, a spark in the powder keg of the dining room. "James, it's Sam," he said. "I'm at Étoile. Get out here now." The manager's laugh boomed, echoing off the chandeliers as he waved a hand dismissively. "James," he said. "Oh, this is priceless. What's he gonna do?" "Carry you out. Get real, man." The hostess clapped her hands, delighted, her voice sing-song. "This is too good," she said, "calling some nobody to save you." "Pathetic." The waiter, emboldened, stepped closer, his voice sharp. "Just give it up," he said. "You're making a fool of yourself." The diner's murmurs swelled, a chorus of agreement, some shaking their heads, others whispering, "He's delusional." Loud enough for Samuel to hear. But Samuel stood unmoved, his phone still pressed to his ear, his friend's voice faint but steady on the other end. His words too soft for the room to catch, but enough to make Samuel nod, his smile sharpening. He lowered the phone, his eyes sweeping over the manager, the hostess, the waiter, the diners, taking in every smirk, every raised phone, every ounce of their arrogance. "He's coming," he said, his voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. The manager scoffed, crossing his arms. "Coming," he said. "Who do you think you are? Nobody's bailing you out. You're done." He snapped his fingers at the security guard, who hesitated, his eyes flicking to Samuel's face, to the certainty in his gaze as if sensing a trap. The hostess, oblivious, leaned forward, her voice dripping with mockery. "What is your friend, some big shot?" she said. "Give me a break. You don't belong here, and neither does he." The words were a knife, and the diner's laughter was the twist, but Samuel didn't flinch, his heart pounding with anticipation, knowing the storm about to break. The security guard took a step closer, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Come on, man," he said. "Let's not make this ugly." But Samuel's eyes were locked on the double doors to the kitchen, his smile unwavering as the faint sound of footsteps echoed from beyond. The dining room didn't notice, too caught up in their triumph, but Samuel did, and his pulse quickened, not with fear but with certainty. The manager, sensing his defiance, lost his patience, his voice rising to a shout. "Enough," he said. "You're trespassing, and I'm done with this nonsense. Get him out now." The security guard reached for Samuel's arm, but before he could make contact, the kitchen door swung open with a force that rattled the chandeliers, and every head turned. James Monroe, Étoile's head. Chas stepped into the dining room, his white chef's coat pristine, his presence commanding, his eyes blazing with a mix of shock and fury. The diners gasped, some recognizing him from food magazines, their phones lowering as whispers spread like wildfire. The hostess's tablet slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor, and the waiter's face drained of color, his tray slipping from his grip. The manager's mouth opened, but no words came, his authority collapsing like a house of cards. James's gaze swept the room. The security guard froze in mid-step, the diners' stunned faces, the staff's sudden panic before landing on Samuel, his friend standing tall in the center of it all. "Sam," he said, his voice low, resonant, filling the room. "What the hell is going on here?" The question was a thunderbolt, and the dining room held its breath, the weight of realization crashing over every soul. Samuel stepped forward, his smile now a blade of its own, his voice clear and unshaken. "They refused to serve me, James," he said. "They said I don't belong here, that I'm a nobody, a problem. They tried to throw me out." The manager's face went white, his hands trembling as he stammered. "Chef Monroe, I didn't know," but James raised a hand, silencing him, his eyes never leaving Samuel's. "You didn't know," he said, his voice deceptively calm, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. "You didn't know Samuel Carter, the man who created the dish that made this restaurant? The man whose recipe is the heart of Étoile? The hostess gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, and the waiter backed away, his eyes wide with terror. The diners, their phones now forgotten, shrank in their seats, the weight of their earlier laughter crushing them. Samuel's smile grew, his heart soaring as he watched the room unravel. Every smirk, every insult, every assumption collapsing under the truth. They thought I was nobody. He said, his voice steady, his eyes locked on the managers. They thought they could laugh me out the door. James's gaze shifted to the manager, the hostess, the waiter, his expression, a storm waiting to break. They were wrong, he said, his words a promise of consequences that made the room shiver. Samuel stood beside him, his boots firm on the oak, his defiance now a beacon, as the dining room realized they'd crossed the wrong man, the wrong legacy, the wrong truth. The game had changed, and they were about to learn how much. The dining room of Étoile was a frozen battlefield, its opulent facade shattered by the true Samuel Carter had unleashed, his words still ringing in the silence. A clarion call for respect that had brought the room to its knees. He stood beside James Monroe, the head chef, his work boots firm on the oak floor, his small, dangerous smile now a blazing beacon of triumph as the reality of his identity sank in like a blade. The manager's face was ashen, his hands shaking as he stammered incoherent apologies, his earlier arrogance reduced to a pitiful whimper. The hostess, her tablet lying broken on the floor, pressed herself against the counter, her eyes wide with terror, her smirk erased as if it had never existed. The waiter, his tray shattered from his earlier stumble, backed away until he hit a table, his face slick with sweat, his confidence obliterated. The diners, their phones lowered their faces. Pale, sat rigid, the weight of their earlier laughter crushing them as they realized they'd mocked the man who'd created Étoile's soul. James's eyes, fierce and unyielding, swept the room, taking in every detail. The cowering staff, the silent diners, the shattered glass before settling in on Samuel. His voice low but resonant, carrying the weight of years of friendship and respect. "Sam, tell me everything," he said. Samuel stepped forward, his boots thumping against the oak, his voice clear and unshaken, each word a reckoning. "They refused to serve me, James," he said. "They said I didn't belong, that I couldn't afford to eat here, that I was a nobody, causing trouble. They laughed at me, mocked me, and tried to throw me out in front of everyone." The manager's mouth opened a desperate gasp, escaping Chef Monroe. "I swear I didn't know he was," he said, his voice cracking, but Samuel cut him off, his eyes snapping to the managers, his smile sharpening. "You didn't know," he said, his voice low but laced with steel. "You didn't need to know who I was. You looked at me, my clothes, my skin, and decided I wasn't worth a second of your time. That's not a mistake. That's a choice." The dining room held its breath, the truth of his words landing like a hammer, and the manager shrank under his gaze, his hands fumbling at his tie as if it were strangling him. The hostess, her face now a mask of panic, tried to speak, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to offend anyone," she said. "I was just doing my job." Samuel turned to her, his eyes blazing. "Your job," he said. "Your job is to welcome guests, not to judge them. Your job is to serve, not to sneer at someone because they don't look like your idea of a customer." The hostess's mouth opened and closed, no words coming, her hands clutching the counter for support. The waiter, his voice shaking, muttered, "We didn't know," but Samuel's voice rose, filling the room. "You didn't need to know," he said. "You should have treated me like a human being. You should have treated everyone like that." The diners flinched, some looking away their earlier sneers. Now a source of shame as Samuel's words echoed, a mirror held up to their complicity. James nodded, his expression a mix of pride and fury, his voice calm but deadly. "You're right, Sam," he said. "This isn't just about you. This is about every guest who's been turned away, every person who's walked through these doors and been made to feel less than. This stops now." The manager, desperate, took a step forward, his hands raised. "Chef Monroe, please give me a chance to make this right," he said, but Samuel's voice cut through his plea, steady and unyielding. "You had your chance," he said. "You had every chance to check my reservation, to listen, to do your job. Instead, you chose to humiliate me. You chose to fail, Étoile." The manager's knees buckled, his face crumpling, as the weight of his actions sank in. The security guard, who'd been silent since James's arrival, backed away, his hands raised as if to distance himself from the wreckage. The hostess, tears now streaking her face, whispered, "I'm sorry," but Samuel's gaze was unrelenting, his voice soft but firm. Sorry doesn't undo what you did, he said. Sorry doesn't erase the way you made me feel, or the way you've made others feel. The dining room was silent, the chandeliers casting their golden glow across the oak, the broken glass glinting on the floor, a symbol of the shattered illusions in the room. Samuel's heart pounded, not with anger now, but with a clarity that felt almost sacred. He'd come here to uncover the truth, to root out the rot his friend had feared, and he'd found it not just in the staff's actions, but in the diner's laughter, in the unspoken rules that had let this happen. But he also felt a flicker of compassion, a memory of his own early days in kitchens, where he'd learned that change was possible, that people could grow. This place was built to be a masterpiece, he said, his eyes sweeping the room, taking in every face, every bowed head. I created the dish that put Étoile on the map, not for the elite, but for anyone who loves food, who believes in excellence. But you've turned it into something else, something small and cruel. That ends tonight. James placed a hand on his shoulder, his pride palpable, his voice a low rumble. You heard my friend, he said. This restaurant is Samuel Carter's legacy, and you've disgraced it, but we're going to fix it. Starting now. The manager's face fell, his hands dropping to his sides, his career unraveling before his eyes. The hostess sobbed openly, now her hands covering her face, and the waiter looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. The diners, their phones long forgotten, sat in stunned silence, some whispering apologies to no one in particular. A woman in a sequined dress. One of the diners who'd laughed earlier stood, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry, she said, her eyes meeting Samuel's. I was wrong. You're incredible. Samuel's gaze softened, but his resolve didn't waver. Thank you, he said, but it's not enough to be sorry. You have to do better. We all do. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes, and sat down, the room shifting from shame to awe. Samuel's words, a spark that lit something new. James's eyes met Samuel's, a silent agreement passing between them, and Samuel knew this was only the beginning. The real work, the real justice was about to start, and he was ready to lead it. His smile returned, not dangerous now, but resolute, a beacon of hope in a room that had forgotten what hope tasted like. The dining room of Étoile was a hushed ruin, its golden chandeliers casting a somber glow over the wreckage of shattered egos and broken illusions. Samuel Carter's truth, a tidal wave that had swept through the restaurant, leaving no one untouched. He stood beside James Monroe, the head chef, his work boots steady on the oak floor, his eyes bright with a resolve that outshone the room's opulence. The manager, his face a mask of defeat, clutched a table for support, his career crumbling under the weight of his prejudice. The hostess, her tears streaking her face, sank behind her counter, her sobs a stark contrast to her earlier smirks. The waiter, his tray, a forgotten heap of glass and metal, stared at the floor, his hands trembling, as if he could feel the earth shifting beneath him. The diners, their phones silenced, their faces etched with shame, sat frozen, the remnants of their laughter, a bitter memory as they faced the man who'd created Étoile's legacy. James's presence was a storm, his white chef's coat a symbol of authority, his voice a low rumble that commanded every ear. This restaurant was built on Samuel Carter's genius, he said, his eyes sweeping the room, taking in every bowed head, every averted gaze, his dish. His vision made Étoile what it is. And you've disgraced it with your arrogance, your prejudice, your failure to see the worth in every guest. The manager's voice cracked, a desperate plea breaking through his panic. Chef Monroe, please. I can fix this, he said, his hands raised as if to shield himself from the inevitable. But James's gaze was unrelenting, his voice cutting like a knife. You had years to fix this, he said, years of complaints, years of guests turned away, years of letting this place rot. You're done. The manager's knees buckled, a choked sob escaping as he staggered back. The reality of his firing sinking in, the diners gasped, some whispering, others staring in stunned silence as the man who'd wielded such authority moments ago was reduced to nothing. James's gaze shifted to the hostess and the waiter, his voice unwavering. You two are suspended. Effective immediately, he said. You'll undergo mandatory training on respect and service. If you can't meet our standards, you're out. The hostess's sobs grew louder, her hands covering her face while the waiter nodded frantically, his eyes wide with fear. The security guard who'd been silent stepped back, his head bowed as if grateful to be overlooked. James's voice rose, dressing the entire room. Étoile is closed until further notice, he said. Every employee will be reevaluated. Every policy will be rewritten. Every guest who's been wronged will be compensated. This restaurant will honor Samuel Carter's legacy, or it won't open again. The diners murmured, some nodding, others looking away, the weight of their earlier actions pressing down. Samuel's heart pounded not with anger, child, but with a sense of purpose, a fire kindled by James's words and his own resolve. He stepped forward, his voice clear, his eyes sweeping the room, taking in every face, every soul who'd witnessed this reckoning. This isn't just about me, he said. This is about every guest who's been judged, every person who's walked through these doors and been made to feel small. I created the braised short rib with truffle glaze for anyone who loves food, not just the elite, but you've turned this place into a gatekeeper's club, and that's not what Étoile is. The dining room was silent, the broken glass glinting on the floor, a reminder of the shattered illusions now swept away. A man in a velvet blazer, one of the diners who'd laughed earlier, stood, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes meeting Samuel's. "I was wrong to laugh. You're a legend." Another diner, a woman in a sequin dress, nodded, her voice quiet. "You're right about respect," she said. "We all failed tonight." Samuel's gaze softened, his mind flashing to his early days in kitchens, where he'd learned that change was possible, that people could grow. "Thank you," he said, "but apologies aren't enough. You have to do better." "We all do." The diners nodded, some wiping tears. Others whispering agreement, the room shifting from shame to inspiration. Samuel's words a spark that lit something new. James's voice cut through, resolute. "We're going to do better starting now," he said. "Tomorrow, Étoile will host a free dinner for the city's immigrant workers, dishwashers, cleaners, builders, the people who keep this city running but are never invited to its tables. Samuel's dish will be served, and he'll be in the kitchen where he belongs." The diners erupted into soft applause, some standing, their faces alight with awe. Samuel's throat tightened, his eyes stinging, but he nodded, his voice steady. "This is what Étoile was meant to be," he said. "A place where everyone's welcome, where excellence isn't about money or status, it's about heart." The applause grew, the diners now on their feet, the room transformed from a battlefield to a beacon of hope. James turned to Samuel, his pride palpable. "You've done more tonight than I ever could, Sam," he said. "You've reminded us why we're here." Samuel looked at him, his heart swelling, but his resolve unshaken. "We're not done, James," he said. "This is just the start." The manager was escorted out, in his head bowed the hostess and waiter sent to the back, their futures hanging by a thread. The diners began to gather their things, some approaching Samuel to offer apologies, others leaving in silence, their perspectives forever altered. Samuel stood tall, his denim jacket a badge of honor, his eyes bright with purpose, knowing this moment would ripple far beyond these walls. He'd come to uncover the truth, but he'd done more. He'd reclaimed his legacy, and he was ready to carry it forward. James clapped him on the shoulder, his voice a low rumble. "Let's get to work, Sam," he said. "The kitchen's waiting." Samuel's smile grew, not just resolute now, but radiant, a testament to what one man, one truth could do. The dining room seemed to exhale, the tension easing into something else, a shared vow to change, a promise to make Étoile worthy of its name once more. The oak floors of Étoile lay silent, the chandeliers dimmed the dining room empty, but alive with the echoes of Samuel Carter's stand a moment that had cracked open the restaurant's gilded facade and set the world ablaze. Samuel stood outside, his denim jacket catching the city's evening breeze, his eyes tracing the neon sign of Étoile, a name he'd given life to decades ago, with a recipe born in a cramped apartment kitchen. The restaurant was closed, its doors locked for a full-scale audit, but the impact of that night was far from over. Samuel's heart was heavy with pride, but also with a quiet trancho, a question that lingered as he watched the city pulse beyond. Had he done enough? James Monroe, the head chef, stood beside him, his white coat traded for a simple jacket, his voice warm with gratitude. "You changed everything, Sam," he said. "You gave Étoile its soul back." Samuel's smile was soft but steady. "We did that, James," he said. "But it's not just about Étoile, it's about what comes next." James nodded, his eyes reflecting the city lights, and they parted. Samuel heading home, unaware of the storm his stand had unleashed online. By dawn, the story had exploded, a spark from Étoile that roared across social media. A diner's video, grainy but powerful, captured Samuel's defiance, his voice cutting through the dining room. "You should have treated me like a human being." Another clip showed James's arrival. His words, "You didn't know Samuel Carter, the man who created the dish that made this restaurant ringing with righteous fury." Hashtags like #JusticeAtOile and #Samuel Carter trended globally, comments flooding with outrage at the staff's prejudice and awe at Samuel's resilience. "He's a legend who took down a Michelin star." One user wrote, "This is what standing up looks like," said another. News outlets seized the story headlines blaring "Retired chef humiliates elite restaurant for discrimination and Étoile closes." After viral showdown, Samuel sat in his modest living room, his phone buzzing with notifications, his eyes scanning the posts, the videos, the articles, each one a ripple from the truth he'd laid bare. He felt a surge of pride, but also a knot of unease, the weight of being a symbol, a voice for something bigger than himself. Étoile's closure had gone viral too, with James's announcement: free dinners for immigrant workers, a full audit, new policies drawing praise from activists and customers alike. Étoile will reopen as a place for everyone. James had told reporters, crediting Samuel, "He showed us the way." The response was overwhelming, with chefs pledging support, patrons vowing to return, and competitors issuing their own diversity statements. Étoile was no longer just a restaurant, it was a movement, a testament to what one man's courage could do. But Samuel, scrolling through the comments, saw the darker side too. The trolls, the skeptics, the voices calling it a stunt, accusing him of exploiting his identity. He knew they'd mess up. One commenter read, "He set them up." The words stung, but Samuel shook them off, his friend's voice echoing in his mind. "Do what's right, Sam. Let the haters talk." He closed his phone, his heart racing, and looked out at the city skyline where Étoile's sign still glowed faintly. He'd done what was right, but the tro lingered. Had he changed hearts, or just headlines? In his community, the impact was undeniable. At the local market, vendors who'd known him for years clapped him on the back, their voices proud. "You showed them," Sam once said, handing him a free bag of greens. Young cooks, many immigrants like the ones Étoile would soon serve, approached him, their eyes wide. "I want to be like you." A teenager said, his voice trembling. "You made me believe I could." Samuel's throat tightened, his voice gentle. "You already are," he said. "Just keep cooking, keep being you." Those moments, small but profound, were proof that his stand had reached beyond the dining room. Étoile's audit was nearly complete, with new policies drafted, mandatory respect training, a guest advocacy program, a commitment to diversity in hiring. Samuel had sat in on the meetings, his voice shaping the future of the restaurant he'd built. "This isn't just about avoiding mistakes," he told the team, his eyes steady. "It's about creating a place where everyone feels seen." The new staff, a mix of backgrounds, nodded, their resolve mirroring his own, and Samuel felt a spark of hope, a belief that Étoile could be reborn. That evening, James called him to the restaurant. The dining room still closed, but buzzing with preparations for the free dinner. "We're naming the event after you, Sam," James said, his grin wide. "The Carter Community Feast." Samuel shook his head, his smile wry. "Don't make it about me," he said. "Make it about them. The workers, the dreamers, the ones who've been invisible too long." James clapped him on the shoulder, his voice warm. "That's why it's your name, Sam," he said. "You're their voice." Samuel nodded, his heart full. But the weight of that responsibility pressed against him. He thought of the diners who'd apologized, of the woman in the sequin dress who'd said, "You're incredible," of the man who'd admitted, "We all failed." Those moments were real proof that change was possible, that his stand had planted seeds. Étoile's reopening was weeks away, but its transformation was already underway. Its legacy tied not just to Samuel's dish, but to the promise of inclusion. He looked at James, his smile strengthening. "Let's make this feast count," he said, "for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." James nodded, his pride palpable. "We will, Sam," he said, "and you're leading the way." Samuel left the restaurant, his boots echoing on the oak, his heart lighter, his resolve renewed. The world was watching, but he wasn't afraid. He'd faced a room full of prejudice and come out stronger, and now he was ready to carry that strength forward, to make sure Étoile's light shone for all. The city skyline glittered outside, and somewhere in its heart, Étoile waited, ready to rise again, a testament to what one man, one truth could do. The city skyline glowed beyond Samuel Carter's modest apartment window, a constellation of lights that seemed to hum with the energy of a world reshaped by his stand. At Étoile weeks had passed since that night when he'd faced a dining room steeped in prejudice and turned it into a beacon of change. His voice, a flame that had ignited a movement. Étoile remained closed, and its oak floors silent, its chandeliers dim, but the work to rebuild it was alive and Samuel was its heart. At 55, he'd become more than the chef who'd created the braised short rib with truffle. Glaze, he was a symbol, a mentor, a force that had redefined what a Michelin-star restaurant could mean. His phone buzzed with messages from chefs who admired him, from activists who invited him to speak, from young cooks who said, "You showed me I belong in the kitchen." But Samuel wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing a legacy that honored the promise he'd made decades ago when he'd first stirred a pot in a cramped apartment, dreaming of a world where food brought people together, no matter who they were. He sat at his kitchen table, a notebook open before him, filled with ideas for Étoile's reopening, each one bearing his steady handwriting. A menu that celebrated diverse flavors, a scholarship for aspiring chefs from marginalized communities, a public commitment to inclusivity. He'd helped craft every detail, his voice woven into the restaurant's future. James Monroe, the head chef, had trusted him with this, had looked at him that night outside Étoile and said, "You're not just a chef, Sam, you're a leader." Those words had stayed with him, a fire that burned brighter with every step he took. But the path wasn't without its challenges. The weight of expectation pressed against him, the eyes of the world watching, waiting for him to stumble. He'd seen the online comments, the ones that called his stand a publicity stunt, that questioned his motives, that tried to dim his light. "They'll always try to pull you down," James had told him, his voice steady as they planned the Carter Community Feast. "But you keep going. You do it for the ones who need you," and Samuel did. He thought of the guest complaints his friend had shared, the stories of people turned away, their dignity, stripped, their voices ignored until he'd given them a platform. He thought of the diners who'd apologized, of the man in the velvet blazer who'd said, "You're a legend," of the woman who'd admitted, "We all failed." Those moments were his fuel proof that change was possible, that one man's truth could shift the world. Étoile's transformation was nearly complete, its reopening set for next month, and Samuel was ready to see it through. He'd visited the restaurant daily, walking its empty halls, his boots echoing where the sneers of entitled diners had once rung. The staff had been overhauled. Some, like the hostess and waiter, were given a chance to retrain, to prove they could change, while others, like the manager, were gone for good. New hires, diverse and passionate, had been brought in, each one trained under Samuel's watchful eye. "This isn't just about cooking," he'd told them, his voice firm but warm. "This is about heart. You're here to make every guest feel like they matter." The new team had nodded, their eyes bright with purpose, and Samuel felt a surge of hope, a belief that Étoile could be what it was always meant to be. But his mission extended beyond Étoile. The restaurant was just one star in a constellation of culinary spaces, and Samuel had asked James to let him visit other kitchens to ensure the rot he'd found at Étoile hadn't spread. "You sure you're up for this?" James had asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Samuel had smiled, his eyes steady. "I've been fighting battles my whole life," he said. "This is just a new one." He'd started with a bistro, uptown, walking in unannounced, his denim jacket drawing glances, his presence testing the staff. He'd found small issues, a waiter's curt tone, a guest's concern dismissed, but nothing like the venom of that night. Each time he'd sat down with the team, shared his story, and watched their faces change, their resolve strengthen. "We're better than this," he'd told them, his voice echoing the one he'd used in Étoile's dining room, "and we're going to prove it." The changes rippled outward, each kitchen adopting the policies he'd helped create, each one a step toward a world where no one was judged by their skin or their clothes. In his community, Samuel was no longer just a chef. He was a quiet legend, his story whispered in markets and barbershops and church halls. A young cook, a recent immigrant, approached him one day, his voice trembling. "I heard what you did," he said. "You made me think I could be a chef too?" Samuel's heart swelled, his voice gentle. "You can," he said, "and you will. Don't let anyone tell you different." Those moments, small but profound, were why he kept going, why he refused to let the skeptics win. The night of the Carter Community Feast arrived. Étoile's dining room alive with laughter and warmth filled with dishwashers, cleaners, builders, the city's unsung heroes. Samuel stood in the kitchen, his apron tied his hands, moving with the same precision that had created his famous dish decades ago. The braised short rib with truffle glaze was served to every guest, free, a gift from a man who'd once been told he didn't belong. A worker, his hands rough from years of labor, approached him after his eyes shining. "This is the best meal I've ever had," he said. "Thank you for seeing us." Samuel nodded, his throat tight. "You were always seen," he said. "This is your table now." The feast was a triumph covered by news outlets, shared across social media, a symbol of what Étoile could be. As the reopening loomed, Samuel stood in the dining room, the oak floors polished, the chandeliers gleaming, the air humming with possibility. James joined him, his smile wide. "This place is yours, Sam," he said. "You brought it back." Samuel shook his head, his voice steady. "It's ours," he said. "And it's theirs, everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." James nodded, his hand on Samuel's shoulder, and together they planned the reopening, a celebration of diversity with community leaders, former guests who'd been wronged, and a new team ready to serve with heart. Samuel's heart raced not with fear, but with purpose, a vision of a world where no one had to fight to be seen. The night before the reopening, he sat at his kitchen table, his notebook open, writing a message for the event, his words a distillation of everything he'd learned. "Food is for everyone," he wrote. "Stand up, speak out, and never let anyone tell you your place, your heart, your work, your truth. That's what makes you belong." He closed the notebook, his smile resolute, his heart full. Étoile would reopen tomorrow, a star reborn, and Samuel would be there not just as a chef, but as a leader, a change maker, a man who'd faced injustice and turned it into hope. The world was watching, and he was ready to show them what came next. Samuel, a legendary chef, faced humiliation at his own Michelin-star restaurant, only to reveal his identity and transform it into a beacon of diversity. Thanks for watching this powerful story. Smash that like button, share to inspire others, and subscribe with notifications on for our latest videos. Your support fuels change. Let's keep it going. See you in the next one.